Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. I never imagined a single moment could fracture everything I thought I understood about love, loyalty, and the quiet spaces between desire and restraint. It began with a touch that lingered a second too long, not accidental, not innocent. His hands at my waist felt certain, deliberate, as though he had been waiting for permission. Neither of us dared to speak aloud. And behind me, my husband's presence wasn't distant. It was closer than breath, heavier than silence, charged with something I couldn't name without unraveling. We were three people standing at the edge of something dangerous. The room felt warmer than it should have. Maybe it was the way his fingers traced slow circles against my hips, or the way my husband shifted behind me, so near that I could feel the heat of him through the thin fabric separating us. No one said stop. No one said anything at all, but the air pulsed with unasked questions, with curiosity, with the kind of tension that builds quietly over months, in stolen glances across dinner tables, in conversations that dipped too deep, in laughter that carried a hidden note. I had noticed the way my husband watched us before, the way his jaw tightened, not in anger but in fascination. And I had noticed the way the other man looked at me, like he was memorizing my reactions. The tilt of my head, the soft catch in my breath when he leaned closer than necessary. We told ourselves it was harmless, just chemistry, just imagination. But imagination doesn't make your pulse race like that. That night everything felt amplified. Every shift of my body seemed to echo. Every whisper of fabric brushing against skin felt deliberate. I could feel my husband move closer behind me, his breath grazing the back of my neck. There was no protest in him, only intensity, only watchfulness. As if he needed to see it, as if witnessing it made it real in a way fantasy never could. And I felt torn, not between two men but between two versions of myself. The woman who played by the rules, and the woman who wanted to know what would happen if she didn't. His hands guided me slowly, not forceful, not rushed. The movement was measured, intimate in a way that felt more emotional than physical. My husband's presence behind me wasn't distant or forgotten, it was grounding. His fingers grazed my arms, my waist subtle, almost protective, yet there was something else there too. Something raw, something vulnerable. He wasn't pulling away, he was leaning in. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than any sound in the room. The other man's lips brushed near my ear, my name falling from him in a whisper that felt heavier than it should have. And behind me my husband's breath stilled, as though he was absorbing every second, every shift, every press of closeness between us. Was this betrayal, or was it a confession we had all been too afraid to voice? The truth is, none of us were innocent. We had built this tension together, brick by brick, glance by glance. And now we stood inside it, feeling the walls close in around our restraint. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Only the quiet unraveling of boundaries we once swore would never bend. I closed my eyes for a second, suspended between them, between comfort and curiosity, between devotion and desire. I didn't know what this meant for us tomorrow. I didn't know whether this moment would destroy us or expose something we had been pretending not to see. All I knew was that neither of them stepped back, and neither did I. The room seemed to shrink around us, every movement magnified, every breath shared like a secret we weren't ready to speak. My fingers brushed against his hand, just a fleeting contact, and it sent a jolt through me that neither of us could ignore. He didn't pull away though, he let it linger, a quiet acknowledgement of what we both felt but dared not name. Behind me my husband's presence was magnetic. Every subtle shift of his weight, every tilt of his head drew my attention without words. It was like we were all caught in a delicate gravitational pull, orbiting the same heat, the same tension, unable to escape yet unwilling to crash. I could hear the faint rustle of fabric as he leaned closer, close enough that I felt the warmth of his chest against my back. Not touching, not yet, but close enough for the anticipation to thrum like a second heartbeat. My mind raced, wondering if this was curiosity, desire, or something deeper I wasn't prepared to name. My lips parted slightly, catching the faint scent of him, and I realized just how aware I was of every detail. The slight hitch in his breath, the way his eyes tracked my every movement, the quiet, unspoken way he let me set the pace. We exchanged glances that lasted too long, a silent conversation in which every expression carried meaning. The way he looked at me was different from how my husband did, sharp, attentive, curious, like he was trying to memorize the nuances of my reactions. And my husband, steady behind me, held his own storm in his gaze, quiet but impossible to ignore. I was suspended between the two, feeling their combined presence like a tide pressing against my skin. Every accidental brush of our hands, Every small shift in posture made my pulse accelerate. I wanted to pull away to regain control, but the magnetism of it all kept me rooted in place. Our lips didn't meet, our hands didn't fully connect, yet the intimacy was undeniable, a slow burn carried in gestures, in breaths, in the closeness that left the room thick with unspoken longing. I could feel the tension coiling tighter, an invisible thread that pulled at all of us, making ordinary actions feel charged, ordinary words feel weighty. I noticed the subtle ways he mirrored me, leaning slightly forward when I did, tilting his head as if coaxing a smile, waiting for permission I couldn't give. And my husband, patient yet intense, responded to those shifts as if he understood the silent language we were all speaking. There was a push and pull, a dance that neither dared to finish, a thrill in the restraint itself. Time seemed to stretch, every second heavy with the promise of what might happen, and the danger of what it could mean. I couldn't predict the outcome, and that uncertainty made every glance, every touch, every sigh between us feel electric. I was standing in a room with two men who knew me in different ways, and the tension wasn't about desire alone, it was about trust, curiosity, and a boundary none of us were ready to cross yet. And still the heat lingered, thick in the air, leaving me breathless and aware that whatever happened next could change everything. If only we dared to move. The air between us had grown heavier, almost tactile, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Every glance, every subtle movement carried weight. I could feel the unspoken questions bouncing silently between us. What if we let ourselves feel this? What if we didn't? I wanted to lean in, to close the gap that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Yet some invisible barrier held me back, not fear exactly, but respect, history, and the tangled web of promises we hadn't yet untangled. His eyes lingered on me longer than they should, dark and searching, and my chest tightened with the tension of wanting and restraining at the same time. One of his fingers brushed mine, an almost accidental graze, and the jolt it sent through me made me step back, though I hated the distance I had created. Behind me, my husband's presence was equally overwhelming, a steadying force that carried a quiet intensity I hadn't realized I craved until now. He didn't say anything, but the weight of his gaze told me everything. He understood the rules I was trying to uphold, yet he also understood the temptation that threatened them. I thought about all the walls we'd built, the quiet routines, the whispered agreements, the secrets we didn't dare to speak aloud. Each one felt flimsy now, like a paper barrier that trembled under the pull of desire. The man in front of me leaned slightly forward, eyes softening, lips parted as if about to speak, and I almost gave in, almost allowed myself to feel without restriction. But my own fingers gripping the edge of the table to steady myself reminded me how complicated this was. Desire was there, yes, but it wasn't just about craving another person. It was about guilt, curiosity, connection, and a longing for something we hadn't named yet. I could feel the brush of shoulders, the subtle weight of their presence surrounding me. Every accidental touch, a hand that lingered too long near mine, a knee that shifted closer sent a shiver up my spine. And then, just when the heat felt unbearable, one of them pulled slightly away. Not because they didn't want it, but because the want was too intense, too dangerous, too much to confront all at once. That pause made the air thrum with anticipation. Every look held a conversation that words couldn't capture. I realized how fragile this moment was, the balance between temptation and restraint, curiosity and caution. It was intoxicating and terrifying. My chest rose and fell with the rhythm of unsaid words. They both wanted me, that much was clear. Yet the walls of loyalty, memory, and self-control kept each of us from collapsing entirely into the pull of the other. And maybe that was what made it feel so alive. The tension wasn't just about what we were doing, it was about what we hadn't done, what we were afraid to admit to ourselves. I leaned slightly forward, almost letting the space close, almost letting the invisible threads snap entirely. But my hand slid over the table instead, a subtle compromise, a gesture that kept the longing suspended. All around us the room hummed with electricity, unspoken, undeniable, dangerously close to something irreversible. And in that moment I understood, the heat wasn't just in our bodies. It was in the quiet, the restraint, the collision of desire and conscience all hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. The room had become a living pulse vibrating with the quiet electricity of everything unsaid. Every movement felt magnified, every breath a drumbeat in the symphony of tension. I could feel him there, so close it was as if the space between us were nothing more than air holding back a storm. My fingers itched to reach out to break the fragile boundary, yet the weight of what-ifs held me suspended, teetering on the edge of surrender. Behind me my husband's presence was steady, unwavering, yet charged with a heat that matched my own. The three of us were caught in a silent current, each of us aware of the other, each heartbeat synchronizing in a rhythm we didn't dare name. He leaned slightly closer, his gaze softening in a way that made my chest ache. I noticed the faint rise of his eyebrows, the tiny quiver of his lips. The way his eyes drank in every detail of me, memorizing without touching. I wanted to close the distance, to let the barrier between us vanish. But the moment was sacred, fragile, and I hesitated. My husband shifted behind me, a subtle movement just enough for me to feel the warmth of his chest against my back. The contrast between them, one inviting, one grounding, made the pull almost unbearable. Words hovered on the tip of his tongue, heavy with intent, yet nothing was spoken. And then, almost accidentally, I felt it. His hand brushed mine, a whisper of contact that set the world spinning. Neither of us pulled away, and the silence that followed was deafening, full of longing, confession, and the unspoken promise of something more. I could feel my pulse in my throat, in the tips of my fingers, in the quiet tremor of my breath. The space between us was no longer just a distance, it had become charged, a living thing that demanded attention, acknowledgement, surrender. I caught his gaze again, a soft, slow look that spoke louder than any words ever could. It wasn't just desire, it was recognition, confession, a raw acknowledgement of the walls we had built around ourselves and the hunger that now pressed against them. My husband's hands shifted lightly, brushing my sides with a restraint that made the moment more electric rather than less. There was no rush, no need to force what had been simmering for months. The intensity was in the pause, the hesitation, the exquisite torture of waiting. I wanted to lean back, to feel him fully, to collapse into the tension that wrapped us like a second skin. And in that suspended moment it happened. A soft whisper, my name, almost drowned by the electricity in the room, barely audible, yet it made the air between us thrum like a wire sparking with current. The world narrowed to the three of us, to the tension that hummed through every nerve, every subtle movement, every shared heartbeat. And just like that, the moment stretched, elastic and fragile, holding the promise of everything we had been too afraid to confront. And then it stopped, a breath held in unison, a silence so profound it felt like the room itself had paused. Nothing had fully happened, and yet everything had changed. The tension was no longer an abstract force, it was a living presence, palpable and intimate, electric in its raw intensity, leaving us trembling on the edge of something we couldn't yet name but couldn't resist feeling. The night had wrapped the city in quiet rain, soft against the windows, a gentle rhythm that seemed to echo the pulse of our hearts. Inside, the room glowed with the warm spill of lamplight, shadows stretching across the walls like they were leaning in to watch us. Every sound, the tap of rain, the faint rustle of fabric, the slow rise and fall of our breaths became a symphony of tension finally allowed to exhale. I could feel the weight of both of them surrounding me, pressing not on my body but on my awareness, on the tight coil of longing that had held me captive for weeks. I leaned back, letting the space dissolve. My breath melted into his, soft, hesitant at first, then with the assurance of months of unspoken understanding. The man in front of me shifted closer, their presence a magnetic pull, and my chest ached from the closeness. Behind me, my husband's warmth pressed against my back, steady, grounding, yet also an unspoken invitation. It wasn't just about desire, it was about trust, surrender, and the layers of connection that had been building, fragile and impossible to deny. Every movement was slow, deliberate, like we were learning the rhythm of each other after a lifetime of hesitation. Fingers brushed just lightly, but the sensation traveled through me as though it were electricity. Skin against skin wasn't action, it was conversation. Every subtle touch spoke the words we couldn't say aloud, longing, confession, relief, and the intoxicating weight of finally letting go. My body wasn't moving, yet I felt it shift, lean, respond. My senses were alive to every detail, the scent of their cologne, the soft warmth of their breath, the tiny brush of hair against a shoulder. Time seemed suspended. I closed my eyes and let myself feel the intimacy of it all, the closeness that had been imagined, restrained, and teased out over endless glances and half-whispered conversations. The room felt like a cocoon, insulated from the world, where nothing mattered but this delicate exchange of trust and passion. We didn't need words. The quiet was enough. Their bodies spoke the words, the confessions, the promise of more. The rain tapped against the windows in a soft cadence, a private soundtrack to the moment we had both feared and longed for. My husband's hands traced the curve of my back, gentle, reverent. The other man's gaze held mine, charged with everything we'd denied ourselves until now. The sensation of being fully seen, fully known, fully desired, made the night feel infinite. Every exhale was shared, every shiver understood, every pause a testament to the bond we had finally allowed ourselves to explore. I opened my eyes to meet their faces, and for a moment nothing else existed, only the warmth, the closeness, the breathtaking intimacy that had nothing to do with action and everything to do with surrender. We were no longer holding back. The tension that had defined us had transformed into a quiet, potent heat that wrapped around us like silk. And in that suspended electric space we finally let ourselves feel, fully, intensely and without apology. Morning light spilled softly through the blinds, painting the room in pale gold. The rain from the night before had stopped, leaving the city damp and quiet, but inside the air still carried the residue of everything that had happened. Silence stretched between us, thick and almost sacred, as if speaking too soon might shatter the fragile equilibrium we had found. I lay between them, heart still thudding in a rhythm that mirrored the night's intensity, but the weight now was different, heavier, complicated, human. The first real glance exchanged was cautious, almost apologetic. Their eyes met mine, and in that instant I saw the reflection of my own conflicted emotions: awe, longing, guilt, and the thrill of having surrendered to something forbidden yet beautiful. We didn't speak. Words felt inadequate, fragile, almost irrelevant compared to the closeness we had just shared. Every small movement, a hand brushing a shoulder, a subtle shift on the bed, a shared inhale became a conversation without sound. It was intimate in a way that wasn't about passion anymore but about the raw honesty of being completely exposed to each other. I thought about what this meant. Was it love, or was it an escape? Did we cross a line, or had we finally reached the truth we had all been dancing around for months? My husband's presence behind me was grounding, his quiet breathing a reminder of the trust that had carried us to this point. The other man's gaze lingered, intense yet gentle, filled with unspoken questions and unsaid promises. Somehow, despite the complicated emotions, we felt closer, tethered by a night of honesty we hadn't dared to speak before. And then the twist came, the soft creak of the door and the sharp intake of breath. A visitor, unexpected, standing in the doorway, eyes wide. Our private world, delicate and suspended, had collided with the outside in an instant. The visitor wasn't just anyone, it was someone who knew pieces of our lives we hadn't yet revealed. The tension of the moment shifted, new stakes layered on top of the raw intimacy of the morning. We froze, our hearts synchronized in sudden alarm, guilt and fear flashing across our faces. Yet even in that moment of intrusion, the connection between us remained unbroken, a secret tether that neither distance nor interruption could sever. The room seemed smaller now, filled with unsaid words, stolen glances and the lingering heat of the night before. We moved carefully, almost reverently, aware of each other in ways we hadn't allowed ourselves to be before. The silence became a language, every glance a punctuation mark in a story of desire, consequence and emotional truth. No one reached for explanation immediately. There was time for that later. For now we were tethered, fragile and alive in a way that defied the ordinary. And in that quiet, messy aftermath, I understood that what had happened was more than a fleeting moment. It had changed the way we saw each other, sharper, closer, more exposed, and no matter the guilt, fear or complication, the bond we shared had deepened in ways that couldn't be undone. The day stretched slowly, golden light spilling into the quiet room, softening the edges of the night's intensity. We sat together, the three of us, letting the silence speak where words could not. No explanations were rushed. No confessions forced, just the slow rhythm of hearts learning to settle after a storm. My fingers brushed against his hand, a simple, gentle touch that carried the weight of every emotion we had shared. Behind me, my husband rested his chin lightly on my shoulder, and I could feel the steady warmth of him, grounding me, reminding me of the trust that had carried us here. We didn't need to decide everything at once. Some things didn't need to be named to be understood. What had happened between us wasn't about fleeting desire or reckless impulses. It was about recognition, honesty and the undeniable bond that had grown between three hearts brave enough to face it. There was no rush, no expectation. Only the quiet, potent awareness that we had touched something rare. A connection that would shape us long after the echoes of this night faded. I leaned my head back for a moment, letting my cheek rest lightly against his chest. One of them placed a soft kiss on my forehead. Another's hand rested gently over mine. Simple gestures, ordinary yet extraordinary, carrying every ounce of tenderness, trust and unspoken promise. We didn't need more than that. The room hummed with warmth, with understanding, with a love that was messy, human and real. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent, but inside our space, time felt suspended. We laughed softly, shared quiet glances and allowed the unspoken truths to linger, heavy with intimacy yet light with acceptance. There was no judgment, no shame, only the raw beautiful acknowledgement of what had been, and the careful decision to carry it forward in whatever form felt right. For some it was fleeting, for others it was the beginning of a new rhythm. And then, as the sun climbed higher, I realized that we had all made a choice. Not just in body but in heart. A choice to trust, to honor, to stay, or to let go with the memory intact, like perfume that refuses to fade. I rested my head on my husband's chest, fingers laced together, hearts synchronized in quiet peace. At the same time, the memory of the other presence lingered, sweet, electric, unforgettable. Love had been tested, desire had been explored, and through it all the truth remained. We had been honest with ourselves and with each other, and that was a kind of magic that didn't need words. The day moved on, but we didn't rush. We lingered, breathing in the quiet warmth of connection, letting the tender closeness speak for us. And in that stillness I understood, no matter what the future held, the night we shared had left its mark, a gentle, haunting, and beautiful imprint on our hearts.